Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pumpkin Coptercast, the only video game show. So today I'm joined by a person I have had the pleasure of speaking to on two separate PAXs. I got Ashley, creator and chief thing doer of the awesome game Grapple Force Rena.
Hello.
So we'll start with the introductions.
Okay. I'm Ashley. I'm the creator of the game Grapple Force Rena. I'm made the game working with Galaxy Trail, the creators behind Freedom Planet, another sort of similar kind of game, another 2D platformer. Though most of everything I did in Grapple Force Rena, I did by myself. So if you were to ask for the person responsible for that game, it would be me, I suppose. But I had some help, but I'm the one who made it.
Okay.
That's me. That's who I am.
So yeah, so when did you first become interested in video games?
Um, Basically as far back as I can remember, really. We had an NES growing up, and I just kind of remember always having it, really. Um, so I didn't get to play like video games all the time constantly, but video games were always a pretty big part of my life and something I always really enjoyed. I think the first game I played was Bubble Bobble on the NES.
Oh, that takes me back.
Yeah, I could
Eh,
barely remember.
Yeah.
I was like 3 or something. I don't know.
So what game and/or games growing up do you do remember playing the most?
Hmm. It depends on your definition of growing up, I suppose. But I had a whole lot of fun with a lot of platformers on the Sega Genesis. I feel like are the ones that are the most memorable to me.
Mm-hmm.
Which you can kind of, if you've played or seen Grapple Force Rena, you can sort of trace like a line pretty clearly between the games I was inspired by and the game I made. Um, I actually had the Sega channel for a little while when I was younger. If you don't know what that is, anybody listening at home, it was basically like kind of like a Netflix for games on your Sega Genesis in the 90s.
Huh.
Yeah, it was a cable service where they were just kind of constantly beaming out the data for Genesis games, and then you would have an adapter that plugs into your console, and it would receive this data, and it would every month you get a selection of like 50 or so Genesis games that you could just load up and then play, and the selection would change every month, and it was super cool, and I got to try a lot of different games that way when I was younger. That's when I played like Gunstar Heroes. I got to play like Dynamite Heady and Rice Star and Rocket Knight and all those really fun like 2D platformers, mascot platformers on the Genesis. Those are the ones I found the most memorable.
Huh.
Mhm.
I just learned a bit of video game history today.
I mean,
And
it's very
uh,
interesting if you want to look into it, the Sega channel.
I think I just might. And what would you say is your favorite game and/or games now?
um, so there's a few different answers to this kind of question. Favorite games of like in retrospective favorite games of all time that I've played. Mischief Makers is way up there. Um, if you don't know Mischief Makers, it's a game by Treasure. It's a Japanese game company that made like a lot of very sort of quirky experimental action games back in the 90s. And Mischief Makers is one that I took a lot of inspiration from. As for games that have come out really recently, like favorites of games I'm playing now, Smash Ultimate is one that I'm getting really big into.
Mm-hmm.
And also, been playing a lot of Tetris 99, which just came out on the Switch. Kind of the weird new Tetris Battle Royale. Like, since it was free and I downloaded, tried it, and I've always been like a big puzzle game head. Like, I've always been a big fan of those competitive puzzlers. So, lately, every time I have a moment or two and I just want to kill like a few minutes, I'll just load up a game of Tetris 99. I've gotten pretty okay at it. I've won once, and I can get into the top 10 pretty reliably. So,
Huh. I had no idea what to make of that game when I first saw it on the Direct.
Tetris 99. Well, I mean, it's free. So,
Yeah.
it's like, well, not exactly free. You have to have the online subscription service, but I already had it, so it's free to me. Another game that came out kind of recently that I enjoyed a whole lot is Into the Breach. It's an indie game made by the same people who made FTL, that sort of spaceship roguelike, where it's basically kind of a very distilled and stripped down tactics RPG kind of game.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
Oh, I remember that.
oh, have you played it?
No, I've heard of it.
It's really good. It's basically, it feels very tactical because there's almost no like random numbers in it or like mischance or anything like that. And you also are always told exactly like what the enemy units are going to do at the end of the turn. So it becomes a lot more about like mitigating the enemy attack and like managing with what resources you have like the best outcome. And it feels very like fun to tinker with, very like I don't know, I just really like it. It's very clean, very very cool game. And those are some games that I've been playing recently that I like a lot.
Okay. And since you said that you're the primary person who worked on almost every single aspect of this game of yours,
Grapple Force Rena.
yes. When did you become interested in game design?
Um, well, basically also forever. Like, since games were always a part of my life, and I was always interested in like making things. I've I always wanted to try making my own games too, and just usually had no idea how. But I would use like whatever tools I had available to me. Um, I distinctly remember having like Windows 3.1 on our home computer and finding out in MS Paint that if you drew like a little guy and you selected it with like the right transparency settings, you could move it around with the mouse. And so I would make like little game levels in MS Paint for you to like drag a little guy around, sort of like simulate jumping and things. I tried making games in like PowerPoint. We had like a presentation kind of software that where if you could click on certain areas or certain objects, it would take you to like different slides and you could do branching paths with it. So I ended up making like some silly little games that basically had like QTEs in them. I never really had like proper game making tools accessible to me, or if I did, I didn't understand them. So when I was a kid, I did a whole lot of like messing around and trying to make games out of whatever I had available that I could wrap my head around.
Okay, and now we can move on to the meat and taters. This this thing I like to pretend is a podcast, but is really just my slow descent into madness. But
That's fine.
so, if we were at a PAX or a similar video game style convention, and someone walked by the booth, what would be the rundown you give them as to what Grapple Force Rena is?
Was at as such a PAX or a game convention and had to give this pitch a lot of times, so I got very good at it. But Grapple Force Rena is an action platform game where you can grapple anywhere. Lots of games have like grappling hook mechanics, lots of 2D platformers, but usually they're restricted to specific points at which you can use the grappling hook, or like specific grapple areas or surfaces that are just kind of lightly peppered around. And I always thought it would be way more fun if you got a grappling hook and you could use it on any surface. So that's how I made the grappling hook in my game work. And I decided when I was prototyping it, I built this grappling hook. I had so much fun with it that I decided that I would try to make an entire game around it, just grappling around. And I think I did a pretty good job.
I can, having played the demo at least twice, I can confirm that.
You haven't played the full game yet?
Unfortunately, my computer is both very old and a Mac.
Oh, I wish I could get the Mac version working. I don't have a Mac myself, which is the biggest obstacle.
But once it is within my power to do so, I fully intend to.
Wonderful.
So as you said, the chief hook, just unintentional joke there. The chief hook of Grapple Force Rena is the ability to grapple anywhere and everywhere. So was that particular idea always a part of the game, or when you started working on it, did you decide to add it in as the game was, coming along?
Well, around when I was in middle school, I started to get my hands on some actual like game making tools, like the Games Factory, which eventually became Fusion, which is still being like worked on and available today as like 2D game making software. But back then it was called the Games Factory, and I had an idea for a platform game. And as I learned how to use the program, I started making like little prototypes for my original game. I say original game because back then most of the people I knew were using the Games Factory to make Sonic fan games, but and I did some of that kind of stuff. But I also had my own original idea for this platform game that was like very overwrought and ambitious with like tons of mechanics and stuff I wanted to put in. And as I was prototyping it, like you had like a melee attack, you had ranged attacks, you could like grab onto like poles and like flip up and stuff. It had all kinds of. You could like sprint and you had a stamina meter. There was a lot of mechanics and different things you could do. But you also had this grappling hook that had like a dedicated button on it. And then I made it work on any surface. And when I was testing it out, I mostly found myself just like jumping and swinging around with the little grappling hook I made. And that was just what I had the most fun with. So that project didn't go anywhere. But when I was in high school, I kind of revisited it, the idea of it, and thought about, well, if the grappling hook was the thing I had the most fun with, what if I made the game just about a grappling hook? And I thought about like, okay, so you only have the grappling hook and like jump, and that's it. So you can't like attack enemies, as I was thinking. But then so I tried to think of a way you could attack enemies with the grappling hook. And like almost immediately, I remembered the game Mischief Makers that I mentioned earlier for the Nintendo 64. That game's a 2D platform game that focuses entirely around grabbing and throwing enemies and objects as its core mechanic. And I was thinking, oh, I could do something like that. So if you grab a surface, you would swing around and you could climb around and stuff. But if you grabbed an object or an enemy, you'd pick it up and then you could throw it, and that would be your attack. And that basic idea that I had back in high school didn't change very much since I decided to revisit it and make it into Grapple Force Rena. So it was an idea, the basic mechanics of it was an idea I had for a while. And I guess that's the story of how I came up with the game mechanics.
Okay. And as someone who knows exactly nothing about any aspect of creating a game, like, how long from when you just were thinking of the idea and the characters and all that to when it was released on Steam did it take to make?
So I don't have exact dates, and I guess you could have a different starting point depending on whether you say the idea was like back in high school and I had the game mechanics idea, or like in my adulthood when I decided to actually like hunker down and make this thing and make a new project out of it. Which I'm just going to say that was the point. The When I decided to make this game in particular, make Grapple Force Rena. Um, I think it was around spring 2013 when I started laying the foundations of it and like really getting started on what would become the final project. And it released in December 2018. So a bit over 5 years was about the amount of time. I could have done it sooner, but I wasn't able to work on the game full time for the entire time I worked on it. In the middle, I ended up having to go back and get a day job for a while to support myself while I worked on the game, and that slowed it down quite a bit. But I was able to get working on it full time again when Galaxy Trail picked me up and started supporting me instead, so that I could release it under their brand, which I'm very, very grateful for. And so, yeah, I would say 5 years, but not like 5 sustained years of full time work.
Okay. And what would you say were some of the challenges or the less than pleasant aspects that came along when you were making this game?
One big thing was finding the time and the focus before I could work on it full time. I have like attention deficit problems and problems staying focused on a task for a long time, especially if it's not engaging or if it's like busy work. And something about making a game is that there's a lot of periods of like very engaging work of like making new like systems and testing and refining things. And then but there's also a whole lot of like drudgery and grind to it, of like animating in between frames on animations, or like doing like new level layouts, and well, not new level layouts really. New level layouts is fun, but having to go back and like refine the layouts and like debug things, and there's a lot of it that's very hard to stay focused on for me. I imagine not everybody would have the same challenges, but I think what was a bigger challenge is the fact that since it was a solo project, having to do basically everything myself except for the music and the sound effects, which were the music was done by a team of 7 very talented people, and the sound effects were done by Jason from Galaxy Trail, who also worked a bit on Freedom Planet, I think. But yeah, everything else, like the backgrounds and the story and the programming and the level design and all the animations, is done by me. And it's very daunting to do that amount of content just like by yourself, of just being like, oh, if I want like a hit flash to appear when you throw a guy at another guy, I have to draw that. Or like, if I want to make this new enemy, I have to animate like every frame of it. Or if I want this background to have more detail, I have to draw the background detail. So it was very difficult not being able to like delegate anything, I suppose, of just knowing that anything I wanted to add to this game was something I had to do. And a big challenge of that is knowing when to stop, like when to move on and call something finished, because it's very easy to imagine a way in which something can be improved if you're working on something, or even if you're not working on something and just playing or watching something somebody else did. It's very easy to point at things for being like, oh, this would look better if you added like some dust clouds, or oh, this enemy could use a few more patterns to make it more dynamic and stuff. And if you keep on working on something like that, you'll never ever finish it. So learning when to draw the line and be like, this is good enough. Like this could be better, but this just has to be finished, and this is good enough for now. Learning where to do that is one of the biggest challenges of making a project by yourself, I think. So there was a lot of like compromises and things that I had to not do, and things I had to like evaluate as being important enough to spend the extra work on. And so I think that was the biggest challenge, is having to do everything yourself and having to decide like what's worth doing and when you have to move on. Something I kept telling myself while making the game is finished is better than perfect. So I don't think Grapple Force Rena is perfect. There's like, when I look at it and play it, I can only see the places where I would want to improve on it or add to it. But it's finished, which is something I think I can be proud of. But needless to say, I don't think I'm ever going to make a project this big by myself again. I just don't have it in me. And yeah, I suppose that's the answer to that question of the biggest challenges.
Okay, and what platforms is Grapple Force Rena currently available for purchasing on?
Grapple Force Rena right now is only on PC through Steam. I want to get it on other PC storefronts very soon after I'm finished with this update I'm working on now. I am still working on it and adding things to it, because I don't feel like I said, the whole thing of like having to draw the line and say it's done is there's still stuff I want to add to it before I can feel like it is really done. So I'm still updating it. And after I'm done with this update I'm working on now, I'm going to focus a little bit more on getting it onto other platforms like GOG and Itch and maybe Humble Store or something like that. I would really like to see if we can get it on the Epic Store or Discord too. But the path that way is not very clear. As far as other things like console ports, I'm definitely interested in doing a console port. I feel like it would do better on console than it did on PC, but the opportunity hasn't come along yet. We don't have enough to really like finance doing a console port on our own, because we'd have to do a source port for like the engine of it, which would be pretty pricey and time consuming. So we'd probably have to partner up with like another publishing company or something like that. We're putting our feelers out there and seeing if anybody would be interested, but nothing concrete has popped up yet. So in the meantime, I'm just working on the game to make it like sort of as good of a version of itself as it can be.
Okay. And now time for the question which everyone who's ever been on this show has always understood perfectly, and there's never been any confusion on it ever. Ashley, in your opinion, is video games?
My answer to is video games is, what do you think?
All right, then.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, this particular episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast has come to a close. I would like to thank Ashley for joining me today and telling me all about this amazing game.
Thank you for having me.
And yes, if any of the -7 people who have listened to this are interested, you can like and subscribe. On the rare times I post anything worth listening to, you can follow me on the Twitters at tgorman83.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any sort of social medias you wish to plug?
I'm mostly on Twitter. The Twitter for the game is at Grapple Force, and my personal Twitter is at Fluttersprite. The website for the game is grappleforce.com, and you can find us on Steam. The game's Grapple Force Rena. And as we always say on the Pumpkin Copter Cast, have a gorge day.
Oh, I might have to take that.
What do you mean, take it? That's what you always say, isn't it?
It is now.
Ah.
So Yes, as I apparently always say on the Pumpkin Copter cast, have a gourd day, everyone.
See you next time. Well, you won't see me, but you'll see our host.